The activist group Anonymous has carried out some high-profile cyber attacks, but now the group wants an online action called Distributed Denial of Service, or DDoS, to be considered a legal form of protest. And they're taking this request all the way to the White House in the form of a petition. Here it is. They compare the action to an Occupy protest and say, quote, instead of a group of people standing outside a building to occupy the area, they are having their computer occupy a website to slow or deny service of that particular website for a short time. Petitioners are also calling for those jailed for conducting DDoS attacks to be released and their records cleared. So far, there's over 1,000 signatures on the petition, so it needs many more in order to require a response from the White House. So can this really be considered a new form of protesting? Joining us now is international human rights lawyer Stanley Cohen, an attorney for the defense in the so-called anonymous PayPal 14 hacking case in California. Mr. Cohen, great to have you on.
Thanks for inviting me.
We hear a lot about these kinds of attacks, DDoS attacks. What exactly are they?
I don't like using the phrase attack. It's more of an action. It's alleged to be a process by which large numbers of people essentially hit a website with tremendous numbers of emails, of cyberspace communications to slow it down, or in certain circumstances to shut it down, which rarely, if ever, happens.
All right. As we saw in that petition there, it's being compared to the Occupy protests. How can you make that comparison, or would you make that comparison?
I make it a better comparison. I think it's very much the 21st century sit-in, counter sit-in that occurred in the South down in the 60s and in the 50s, where people would literally sit in at counters to challenge segregation, to slow down business as usual. When Barack Obama gets on the television and begs his followers, and when politicians implore their followers to get on the switchboards, to shut them down, to send a message to support a position, it's considered free speech. DDoS is essentially nothing different than what Obama is doing, what politicians are doing, and what corporations are doing through lobbying firms.
All right. One could say that there are kind of some notable differences. For example, if you're picketing more traditionally, the more traditional way of protesting is you're kind of a group of people gather outside, they chant, they hold signs. A lot of times that could be very inconvenient for the company, but it doesn't necessarily shut them down, at least for the most part.
We haven't come across, for example, the case that I'm dealing with in Northern California right now, which is sort of the penultimate quote-unquote hacking case, which, by the way, doesn't involve identity theft or theft of services or stealing or anything criminal like that. It's a straight slow-down DDoS attack. It caused no harm. It caused no injury. It caused no financial loss. PayPal admits it. It caused a minor inconvenience. No different than the person blocking a street, no different than the president suggesting that people bombard the switchboard to send a message. We live in a century, we live in a time where by design, our political infrastructure, our economic infrastructure is directed towards cyberspace. We have changed the field, and in order to level the playing field, we've got to recognize First Amendment protections.
All right. I had read, I was reading up a little bit on these DDoS attacks. I know you don't like to use that word attack, but I read that what it does is it infects computers with viruses. Is that true? And in that case, I mean, that's kind of makes people weary of saying that it should be legal.
Well, then you can charge people with criminal mischief. We have statutes that when you break a window, when you're standing in front of the building, it's legal picketing. When you break the window, it's now a crime. So if you infect a computer, you can charge someone not with some sort of conspiracy, but with a criminal mischief offense. We have traditional laws which are designed when people cross the line. It's that way with all First Amendment activities, and it should be no different here. We're talking about classic First Amendment free speech activities. Keep in mind, in this day and age, corporations are considered to be persons for purposes of free speech. Their money is recognized as free speech. How much more true is it when people want to express, through a system designed by the government and country right now, their opposition to a policy by a DDoS action, without criminal mischief, without damage, without injury, and without theft?
All right. So what do you think is the likelihood of this being recognized as a form of civil disobedience, what this petition is calling for?
I think it's less likely at this show that President Obama will recognize it because he has a history of trying to repress free speech. He's afraid of the light of day. I think it's more likely that down the road some of the courts may look at some of these actions and find that there's First Amendment protection and free speech implicated. That's not to say that an effort to change the president's mind shouldn't be undertaken. Again, we're not talking about hacking. We're not talking about theft. We're not talking about injuring property in any sense of the word.
All right, and you had mentioned how, this changed playing field, and we're seeing that in a lot of facets of our life. A lot of it is more being conducted online, or digitally in the cyber world. So would you say that this is going to be the future of protesting?
I think to some degree the future is here. I think that more and more numbers of people of conscience and principle and determination, recognize you can't pick up a phone or write a letter or even petition in front of this anonymous cyberspace corporate entity that's all over the world. The way that has to be done, I think people are going to determine increasingly, is through what are otherwise described as DDoS actions. It's not the time where the pamphleteer could stand on the corner or someone could necessarily blockade a street. The playing field has changed, and means of protest will evolve as well.
Right, the playing field has changed, but it doesn't seem like the government has updated many of the laws regarding technology. Has the time come?
Well, separate but equal was lawful in this country, as was slavery, denying the right to vote for 150 years. I think the time has come. I think that Congress will increasingly understand that the Patriot Act and 9/11 has been used as a subterfuge and a pretext to pass these incredibly oppressive laws which seek to suppress free speech, which seek to control the discussion and the dialogue, and which seek to keep people out of the debate. That's what the First Amendment stands for, and that, I would suggest, is what DDoS actions is covered by.
All right. Lastly, I do want to mention the DDoS attack is considered illegal. This is under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and currently there's 14 people that have been charged under it for carrying out this very act. I know this petition calls for these people to be released and that it be kind of wiped off of their records. What do you think is the likelihood of that happening?
Well, there's 14 people facing trial in Northern California, and I'm representing Mercedes Hafer, who's one of those defendants. There's probably several dozen persons throughout the United States who have been charged. I think prosecutors are hoping that some of these cases are going to go away. I think they're trying to sort of fold over cases involving allegations of theft with pure free speech. I think the pure free speech cases will evolve and eventually go away one way or another, because it's difficult to convince a jury that our best and our brightest, our children, have broken any law when they're simply registering their opposition to a policy by a DDoS action and not stealing or diverting or causing any damage to the computer system.
Really interesting. Mr. Cohen, thanks so much for coming on the show. That was Stanley Cohen, international human rights lawyer.
Thank you so much for inviting me.